Apartment number 13. Elif had been living alone for a long time. Her days were filled with the routine of returning home from work, watching something on TV, and then falling asleep. Until that night, there was something strange about apartment number 13. Elif usually avoided that apartment and rarely saw the people living there. But that night, she heard a rustling sound coming from the stairwell. The sound was coming from the door of apartment number 13. Elif thought about opening the door, but hesitated for a moment. Despite the unease that filled her, her curiosity got the better of her, and she gently pushed the door open. As she stepped inside, she immediately realized that the apartment was not a normal place. The walls were old and worn, as if no one had lived there for years. Suddenly, she heard a whisper from one of the back rooms. It wasn't just one person's voice. It was like a dark chant whispered by multiple people at once. Elif wanted to step back in fear, but a force pulled her inside. Her vision went black, and suddenly she found herself in a cold hospital corridor. The hospital. When she opened her eyes, she found herself under the cold fluorescent lights of a hospital. Everything was white, but it was a kind of white that chilled her to the bone. This part of the hospital was deserted, the walls yellowed with dampness. As Elif walked down the corridor, the door of one of the rooms creaked open slightly. Inside there was a bed, and on the bed something lay, but she couldn't quite make it out. As she got closer, she realized it was a corpse on the bed. The body was covered with a sheet, but Elif could feel the eyes under the sheet staring right at her. Her eyes felt locked, as if she couldn't move. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell from the corpse's hand onto the floor, and that drop, as if it were a signal, triggered Elif's senses. She started to run. However, the hospital corridor seemed endless. When she finally found an exit door, it didn't lead her outside, but into the depths of a dark forest. The forest. When Elif felt the cold and damp air of the forest, she realized there was no place left to run. The trees swayed ominously in the darkness, and the wind howled through the branches. Elif heard footsteps behind her. She sped up, but she didn't know where she was going. The further she moved through the trees, the more lost she became. Suddenly, she came upon a small pond. The water was like a black mirror. When Elif looked into the water, she didn't see her own reflection, but the face of the corpse from the hospital. The corpse's eyes were clearer this time. They were staring directly into Elif's soul. In that moment, a flash of realization struck her. The apartment, the hospital, the forest. They were all part of a cycle. She was already dead, trapped in these dark places as a lost soul. There was no escape. No matter what she did, this nightmare would never end. As fear consumed Elif, she was pulled into the dark waters of the pond, merging with the silence of the dark forest. She was now just a shadow lost in the forest, never to be found.